Chapter 7, Section 1. Catherine loved it too, but she said it sounded sweetest at the top of the steps, and she went up in the dark. I followed. They shut the house door below, never noting her absence. It was so full of people. She made no stay at the stairs head, but mounted farther, to the garret where Heathcliff was confined, and called him. He stubbornly declined answering for a while. She persevered, and finally persuaded him to hold communion with her through the boards. I let the poor things converse unmolested, till I supposed the songs were going to cease, and the singers to get some refreshment. Then I clambered up the ladder to warn her. Instead of finding her outside, I heard her voice within. The little monkey had crept by the skylight of one garret, along the roof, into the skylight of the other, and it was with the utmost difficulty I could coax her out again. When she had come, Heathcliff came with her, and she insisted that I should take him into the kitchen, as my fellow servant had gone to a neighbor's, to be removed from the sound of our devil's psalmody, as it pleased him to call it. I told them I intended by no means to encourage their tricks, but as the prisoner had never broken his fast since yesterday's dinner, I would wink at his cheating Mr. Hindley at once. He went down. I set him a stool by the fire, and offered him a quantity of good things, but he was sick and could eat little, and my attempts to entertain him were thrown away. He leaned his 2 elbows on his knees, and his chin on his hands, and remained wrapped in dumb meditation. On my inquiring the subject of his thoughts, he answered gravely, "I'm trying to settle how I shall pay Hindley back. I don't care how long I wait, if I can only do it at last. I hope he will not die before I do." "For shame, Heathcliff," said I. "It is for God to punish wicked people. We should learn to forgive." "No, God won't have the satisfaction that I shall," he returned. "I only wish I knew the best way. Let me alone, and I'll plan it out. While I'm thinking of that I don't feel pain. But, Mr. Lockwood, I forget these tales cannot divert you. I'm annoyed how I should dream of chattering on at such a rate. And you grew cold, and you nodding for bed. I could have told Heathcliff's history, all that you need here, in half a dozen words. Asterisk, 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 asterisk. Thus interrupting herself, the housekeeper rose, and proceeded to lay aside her sewing. But I felt incapable of moving from the hearth, and I was very far from nodding. "Sit still, Mrs. Dean," I cried. "Don't sit still another half hour. You've done just right to tell the story leisurely. That is a method I like, and you must finish it in the same style. I am interested in every character you have mentioned, more or less. The clock is on the stroke of 11, sir. No matter, I am not accustomed to go to bed in the long hours. 1 or 2 is early enough for a person who lies till 10. You shouldn't lie till 10. There's the very prime of the morning gone long before that time. A person who has not done 1/2 his day's work by 10 o'clock, runs a chance of leaving the other half undone. Nevertheless, Mrs. Dean, resume your chair, because tomorrow I intend lengthening the night till afternoon. I prognosticate for myself an obstinate cold, at least. I hope not, sir. Well, you must allow me to leap over some 3 years. During that space, Mrs. Earnshaw—" "No, no, I'll allow nothing of the sort. Are you acquainted with the mood of mind in which, if you were seated alone, and the cat licking its kitten on the rug before you, You would watch the operation so intently that Puss's neglect of one ear would put you seriously out of temper. A terribly lazy mood, I should say. On the contrary, a tiresomely active one. It is mine, at present, and, therefore, continuing minutely, I perceive that people in these regions acquire over people in towns the value that a spider in the dungeon does over a spider in a cottage, to their various occupants. And yet the deep attraction is not entirely owing to the situation of the looker-on. They do live more in earnest, more in themselves, and less in surface, change, and frivolous external things. I could fancy a love for life here almost impossible, and I was a fixed unbeliever in a love of years standing. One state resembles setting a hungry man down to a single dish, on which he may concentrate his entire appetite and do it justice. The other, introducing him to a table laid out by French cooks, he can perhaps extract as much enjoyment from the whole. But each part is a mere atom in his regard and remembrance. Oh, here we are the same as anywhere else, when you get to know us, observed Mrs. Dean, somewhat puzzled at my speech. Excuse me, I responded. You, my good friend, are striking evidence against that assertion. Excepting a few provincialisms of slight consequence, you have no marks of the manners which I am habituated to consider as peculiar to your class. I am sure you have thought a great deal more than the generality of servants think. You have been compelled to cultivate your reflective faculties for want of occasions for frittering your life away in silly trifles. Mrs. Dean laughed. I certainly esteem myself a steady, reasonable kind of body, she said. Not exactly from living among the hills and seeing one set of faces, and one series of actions, from years into years end. But I have undergone sharp discipline, which has taught me wisdom. And then, I have read more than you would fancy, Mr. Lockwood. You could not open a book in this library that I have not looked into, and got something out of also, unless it be that range of Greek and Latin, and that of French. And those I know one from another, it is as much as you can expect of a poor man's daughter. However, if I am to follow my story in true gossip's fashion, I had better go on, and instead of leaping 3 years, I will be content to pass to the next summer, the summer of 1778, that is nearly 23 years ago. Chapter 8. On the morning of a fine June day, my first bonny little nursling, and the last of the ancient Earnshaw stock, was born. We were busy with the hay in a far-away field, when the girl that usually brought our breakfast came running an hour too soon across the meadow and up the lane, calling me as she ran. Oh, such a grand bairn! She panted out. The finest lad that ever breathed. But the doctor says Mrs. must go. He says she's been in a consumption these many months. I heard him tell Mr. Henley, and now she has nothing to keep her, and she will be dead before winter. You must come home directly. You are to nurse it, Nellie, to feed it with sugar and milk, and take care of it day and night. I wish I were you, because it will be all yours when there's no missus. But is she very ill? I asked, flinging down my rake and tying my bonnet. I guess she's. Yet she looks bravely, replied the girl, and she talks as if she thought of living to see it grow a man. She's out of her head for joy, it's such a beauty. If I were her, I am certain I should not die. I should get better at the bare sight of it, in spite of Kenneth. I was fairly mad at him. Dame Archer brought the cherub down to master, in the house, and his face just began to light up, when the old croaker steps forward, and says, "Here, Earnshaw, it's a blessing your wife has been spared to leave you this son. When she came, I felt convinced we shouldn't keep her long. And now, I must tell you, the winter will probably finish her. Don't take on, and fret about it too much, it can't be helped. And besides, you should have known better than to choose such a rush of a lass." "And what did the master answer?" I inquired. "I think he swore, but I didn't mind him. I was straining to see the bairn," and she began again to describe it rapturously. I, as zealous as herself, hurried eagerly home to admire, on my part, though I was very sad for Henley's sake. He had room in his heart only for two idols, his wife and himself. He doted on both, and adored one, and I couldn't conceive how he would bear the loss. When we got to Wuthering Heights, there he stood at the front door, and, as I passed him, I asked, how was the baby? "Nearly ready to run about, Nell," he replied, putting on a cheerful smile. "And the mistress?" I ventured to inquire. "The doctor says she's—" "Damn the doctor!" he interrupted, reddening. "Francis is quite right. She'll be perfectly well by this time next week. Are you going upstairs?" "Will you tell her that I'll come, if she'll promise not to talk?" I left her because she would not hold her tongue, and she must tell her Mr. Kenneth says she must be quiet. I delivered this message to Mrs. Earnshaw. She seemed in flighty spirits, and replied merrily, "I hardly spoke a word, Ellen, and there he has gone out twice, crying." "Well, say I promise I won't speak, but that does not bind me not to laugh at him. Poor soul! Till within a week of her death that gay heart never failed her, and her husband persisted doggedly, nay, furiously, in affirming her health improved every day. When Kenneth warned him that his medicines were useless at that stage of the malady, and he needn't put him to further expense by attending her, he retorted, "I know you need not. She's well. She does not want any more attendance from me. She never was in a consumption. It was a fever, and it is gone. Her pulse is as slow as mine now, and her cheek is cool." He told his wife the same story, and she seemed to believe him. But one night, while leaning on his shoulder, in the act of saying she thought she should be able to get up tomorrow, a fit of coughing took her very slight when he raised her in his arms. She put her two hands about his neck, her face changed, and she was dead. As the girl had anticipated, the child Hareton fell wholly into my hands. Mr. Earnshaw, provided he saw him healthy and never heard him cry, was contented, as far as regarded him. For himself, he grew desperate. His sorrow was of that kind that will not lament. He neither wept nor prayed. He cursed and defied, execrated God and man, and gave himself up to reckless dissipation. The servants could not bear his tyrannical and evil conduct long. Joseph and I were the only two that would stay. I had not the heart to leave my charge, and besides, you know, I had been his foster sister, and excused his behavior more readily than a stranger would. Joseph remained to hector over tenants and laborers, and because it was his vocation to be where he had plenty of wickedness to reprove. The master's bad ways and bad companions formed a pretty example for Catherine and Heathcliff. His treatment of the latter was enough to make a fiend of the saint. And, truly, it appeared as if the lad were possessed of something diabolical at that period. He delighted to witness Henley degrading himself past redemption, and became daily more notable for savage sullenness and ferocity. I could not half tell what an infernal house we had. The curate dropped calling, and nobody decent came near us, at last, unless Edgar Linton's visits to Miss Cathy might be an exception. At 15 she was the queen of the countryside. She had no peer, and she did turn out a haughty, headstrong creature. I own I did not like her, after her infancy was past, and I vexed her frequently by trying to bring down her arrogance. She never took an aversion to me, though. She had a wondrous constancy to old attachments. Even Heathcliff kept his hold on her affections unalterably, and young Linton, with all his superiority, found it difficult to make an equally deep impression. He was my late master, that is his portrait over the fireplace. It used to hang on one side, and his wife's on the other. But hers has been removed, or else you might see something of what she was. Can you make that out? Mrs. Dean raised the candle, and I discerned a soft-featured face, exceedingly resembling the young lady at the Heights, but more pensive and amiable in expression. It formed a sweet picture. The long light hair curled slightly on the temples. The eyes were large and serious. The figure almost too graceful. I did not marvel how Catherine Earnshaw could forget her first friend for such an individual. I marveled much how he, with a mind that corresponded with his person, could fancy my idea of Catherine Earnshaw. A very agreeable portrait, I observed to the housekeeper. Is it like? Single quote, yes, she answered. But he looked better when he was animated. That is his everyday countenance. He wanted spirit in general. Catherine had kept up her acquaintance with the Lintons since her 5 weeks' residence among them, and as she had no temptation to show her rough side in their company, and had the sense to be ashamed of being rude where she experienced such invariable courtesy, she imposed unwittingly on the old lady and gentleman by her ingenious cordiality, gained the admiration of Isabella, and the heart and soul of her brother, acquisitions that flattered her from the first, for she was full of ambition and led her to adopt a double character without exactly intending to deceive anyone. In the place where she heard Heathcliff termed a vulgar young ruffian, and worse than a brute, she took care not to act like him. But at home she had small inclination to practice politeness that would only be laughed at, and restrain an unruly nature when it would bring her neither credit nor praise. Mr. Edgar seldom mustered courage to visit Wuthering Heights openly. He had a terror of Earnshaw's reputation, and shrunk from encountering him, and yet he was always received with our best attempts at civility. The master himself avoided offending him, knowing why he came, and if he could not be gracious, kept out of the way. I rather think his appearance there was distasteful to Catherine. She was not artful, never played the coquette, and had evidently an objection to her two friends meeting at all. For when Heathcliff expressed contempt of Linton in his presence, she could not half coincide, as she did in his absence. And when Linton evinced disgust and antipathy to Heathcliff, she dared not treat his sentiments with indifference, as if depreciation of her playmate were of scarcely any consequence to her. I've had many a laugh at her perplexities and untold troubles, which she vainly strove to hide from my mockery. That sounds ill-natured, but she was so proud that it became really impossible to pity her distresses, till she should be chastened into more humility. She did bring herself, finally, to confess, and to confide in me. There was not a soul else that she might fashion into an adviser. Mr. Hindley had gone from home one afternoon, and Heathcliff presumed to give himself a holiday on the strength of it. He had reached the age of 16 then, I think, and without having bad features, or being deficient in intellect, he contrived to convey an impression of inward and outward repulsiveness that his present aspect retains no traces of. In the first place, he had by that time lost the benefit of his early education. Continual hard work, begun soon and concluded late, had extinguished any curiosity he once possessed in pursuit of knowledge, and any love for books or learning. His childhood's sense of superiority, instilled into him by the favors of old Mr. Earnshaw, was faded away. He struggled long to keep up an equality with Catherine in her studies, and yielded with poignant the silent regret, but he yielded completely, and there was no prevailing on him to take a step in the way of moving upward, when he found he must, necessarily, sink beneath his former level. Then personal appearance sympathized with mental deterioration, he acquired a slouching gait and ignoble look. His naturally reserved disposition was exaggerated into an almost idiotic excess of unsociable moroseness, and he took a grim pleasure, apparently, in exciting the aversion rather than the esteem of his few acquaintances. Catherine and he were constant companions still at his seasons of respite from labor, but he had ceased to express his fondness for her in words, and recoiled with angry suspicion from her girlish caresses, as if conscious there could be no gratification in lavishing such marks of affection on him. On the before-named occasion he came into the house to announce his intention of doing nothing. While I was assisting Miss Cathy to arrange her dress, she had not reckoned on his taking it into his head to be idle, and imagining she would have the whole place to herself, she managed, by some means, to inform Mr. Edgar of her brother's absence, and was then preparing to receive him. "Cathy, are you busy this afternoon?" asked Heathcliff. "Are you going anywhere?" "No, it is raining," she answered. "We have you that silk frock on, then," he said. "Nobody coming here, I hope?" "Not that I know of," stammered Miss, "but you should be in the field now, Heathcliff." "It is an hour past dinner time. I thought you were gone." "Hindley does not often free us from his accursed presence," observed the boy. "I'll not work any more today. I'll stay with you." "Oh, but Joseph will tell," she suggested. "You'd better go. Joseph is loading lime on the further side of Penistone Crags. It will take him till dark, and he'll never know." So, saying, he lounged to the fire, and sat down. Catherine reflected an instant. With knitted brows she found it needful to smooth the way for an intrusion. "Isabella and Edgar Linton talked of calling this afternoon," she said, at the conclusion of a minute's silence. "As it rains, I hardly expect them. But they may come, and if they do, you run the risk of being scolded for no good." "I'll order Ellen to say you are engaged, Cathy," he persisted. "Don't turn me out for those pitiful, silly friends of yours." "I'm on the point, sometimes, of complaining that but I'll not that they will," cried Catherine, gazing at him with a troubled countenance. "Oh, Nelly," she added petulantly, jerking her head away from my hands, "you've combed my hair quite out of curl. That's enough. Let me alone." "What's the point of complaining about, Heathcliff?" "Nothing, only look at the almanac on the wall." He pointed to a framed sheet hanging near the window, and continued, "The crosses are for the evenings you have spent with the Lintons, the dots for those spent with me. Do you see? I've marked every day. Single quote twice very foolish, as if I took notice, replied Catherine, in a peevish tone. And where's the sense of that? To show that I do take notice, said Heathcliff. And should I always be sitting with you? She demanded, growing more irritated. What good do I get? What do you talk about? You might be dumb, or a baby, for anything you say to amuse me, or for anything you do, either. You never told me before that I talked too little, or that you disliked my company, Cathy, exclaimed Heathcliff, in much agitation. It's no company at all, when people know nothing and say nothing, she muttered. Her companion rose up, but he hadn't time to express his feelings further, for a horse's feet were heard on the flags, and having knocked gently, young Lytton entered, his face brilliant with delight at the unexpected summons she had received. Doubtless Catherine marked the difference between her friends, as one came in and the other went out. The contrast resembled what you see in exchanging a bleak, hilly, cold country for a beautiful fertile valley, and his voice and greeting were as opposite as his aspect. He had a sweet, low manner of speaking, and pronounced his words as you do, that's less gruff than we talk here, and softer. I've not come too soon, am I? He said, casting a look at me. I had begun to wipe the plate, and tidy some drawers at the far end in the dresser. No, answered Catherine. What are you doing there, Nellie? My work, miss, I replied. Mr. Hindley had given me directions to make a third party in any private visits Linton chose to pay. She stepped behind me and whispered crossly, Take yourself and your dusters off. When company are in the house, servants don't commence scouring and cleaning in the room when they are. It's a good opportunity, now that master is away, I answered aloud. Single quote, she hates me to be fidgeting over these things in his presence. I'm sure Mr. Edgar will excuse me. I hate you to be fidgeting in my presence, exclaimed the young lady impiously, not allowing her guest time to speak. She had failed to recover her equanimity since the little dispute with Heathcliff. I'm sorry for it, Miss Catherine, was my response, and I proceeded assiduously with my occupation. She, supposing Edgar could not see her, snatched the cloth from my hand, and pinched me, with a prolonged wrench, very spitefully on the arm. I've said I did not love her, and rather relished mortifying her vanity now and then. Besides, she hurt me extremely. So I started up from my knees, and screamed out, Oh, miss, that's a nasty trick. You have no right to nip me, and I'm not going to bear it. I didn't touch you, you lying creature, cried she, her fingers tingling to repeat the act, and her ears red with rage. She never had power to conceal her passion, it always set her whole complexion in a blaze. What's that, then? I retorted, showing a decided purple witness to refute her. She stamped her foot, wavered a moment, and then, irresistibly impelled by the naughty spirit within her, slapped me on the cheek, a stinging blow that filled both eyes with water. Catherine, love. Catherine, interposed Linton, greatly shocked at the double fault of falsehood and violence which his idol had committed. Leave the room, Ellen, she repeated, trembling all over. Little Hareton, who followed me everywhere, and was sitting near me on the floor, at seeing my tears commenced crying himself, and sobbed out complaints against wicked Aunt Cathy, which drew her fury onto his unlucky head. She seized his shoulders, and shook him till the poor child waxed livid, and Edgar thoughtlessly laid hold of her hands to deliver him. In an instant one was wrung free, and the astonished young man felt it applied over his own ear in a way that could not be mistaken for jest. He drew back in consternation. I lifted Hareton in my arms, and walked off to the kitchen with him, leaving the door of communication open, for I was curious to watch how they would settle their disagreement. The insulted visitor moved to the spot where he had laid his hat, pale and with a quivering lip. "That's right," I said to myself. "Take warning and begone. It's a kindness to let you have a glimpse of her genuine disposition." "Where are you going?" demanded Catherine, advancing to the door. He swerved aside, and attempted to pass. "You must not go," she exclaimed, energetically. "I mustn't show," he replied in a subdued voice. "No," she persisted, grasping the handle. "Not yet, Edgar Linton. Sit down. You shall not leave me in that temper. I should be miserable all night, and I won't be miserable for you." "Can I stay after you have struck me?" asked Linton. Catherine was mute. "You've made me afraid and ashamed of you," he continued. "I'll not come here again." Her eyes began to glisten and her lids to twinkle. "And you told a deliberate truth," he said. "I didn't," she cried, recovering her speech. "I did nothing deliberately." "Well, go, if you please get away. And now I'll cry myself sick." She dropped down her knees by a chair, and set to weeping in serious earnest. Edgar persevered in his resolution as far as the court. There he lingered. I resolved to encourage him. "Mrs. Dreadfully Wayward, sir," I called out. "As bad as any marred child. You'd better be riding home, or else she will be sick, only to grieve us." The soft thing looked askance through the window. He possessed the power to depart as much as a cat possesses the power to leave a mouse half killed, or a bird half eaten. "Ah," I thought, "there will be no saving him. He's doomed, and flies to his fate." And so it was. He turned abruptly, hastened into the house again, shut the door behind him, and when I went in the while after to inform them that Earnshaw had come home rabid drunk, ready to pull the whole place about her ears, his ordinary frame of mind in that condition, I saw the quarrel had merely effected a closer intimacy, had broken the outworks of youthful timidity, and enabled them to forsake the disguise of friendship, and confess themselves lovers. Intelligence of Mr. Henley's arrival drove Linton speedily to his horse, and Catherine to her chamber. I went to hide little Hareton, and to take the shot out of the master's fowling piece, which he was fond of playing with in his insane excitement, to the hazard of the lives of any who provoked, or even attracted his notice too much. And I had hit upon the plan of removing it, that he might do less mischief if he did go the length of firing the gun. Chapter 9. He entered, vociferating what was dreadful to hear, and caught me in the act of stowing his son away in the kitchen cupboard. Hareton was impressed with the wholesome terror of encountering either his wild beast's fondness or his madman's rage. For in one he ran a chance of being squeezed and kissed to death, and in the other of being flung into the fire, or dashed against the wall, and the poor thing remained perfectly quiet wherever I chose to put him. "There, I've found it out at last," cried Henley, pulling me back by the skin of my neck, like a dog. "Be heaven and hell, You've sworn between you to murder that child. I know how it is, now, that he is always out of my way. But, with the help of Satan, I shall make you swallow the carving knife, Nellie. You needn't laugh, for I've just crammed Kenneth, head downmost, in the Black Horse Marsh, and 2 is the same as 1, and I want to kill some of you. I shall have no rest till I do. But I don't like the carving knife, Mr. Henley, I answered. It has been cutting red herrings. I'd rather be shot, if you please. You'd rather be damned, he said. And so you shall. No law in England can hinder a man from keeping his house decent, and mine's abominable. Open your mouth. He held the knife in his hand, and pushed its point between my teeth, but, for my part, I was never much afraid of his vagaries. I spat out, and affirmed it tasted detestably. I would not take it on any account. Oh, said he, releasing me, I see that hideous little villain is not Hareton. I beg your pardon, Nell. If it be, he deserves flaying alive for not running to welcome me, and for screaming as if I were a goblin. Unnatural cub, come hither. I will teach thee to impose on a good-hearted, deluded father. Now, don't you think the lad would be handsomer crocked? It makes a dog fiercer, and I love something fierce. Get me a scissors, something fierce and trim. Besides, it's infernal affectation, devilish conceit it is, to cherish our ears. We're asses enough without them. Hush, child, hush. Well then, it is my darling. Wished, dry thy eyes, there's a joy. Kiss me. What? It won't. Kiss me, Hareton. Damn thee, kiss me. By God, as if I would rear such a monster. As sure as I'm living, I'll break the brat's neck. Poor Hareton was squalling and kicking in his father's arms with all his might, and redoubled his yells when he carried him upstairs and lifted him over the banister. I cried out that he would frighten the child into fits, and ran to rescue him. As I reached them, Hindley leant forward on the rails to listen to a noise below, almost forgetting what he had in his hands. "Who is that?" he asked, hearing someone approaching the stairs foot. I leaned forward also, for the purpose of signing to Heathcliff, whose step I recognized, not to come further. And, at the instant when my eye quoted Hareton, he gave a sudden spring, delivered himself from the careless grasp that held him, and fell. There was scarcely time to experience a thrill of horror before we saw that the little wretch was safe. Heathcliff arrived underneath just at the critical moment. By a natural impulse he arrested his descent, and setting him on his feet, looked up to discover the author of the accident. A miser who has parted with a lucky lottery ticket for 5 shillings, and finds next day he has lost in the bargain £5,000, could not show a blanker countenance than he did on beholding the figure of Mr. Earnshaw above. It expressed, plainer than words could do, the intensest anguish at having made himself the instrument of thwarting his own revenge. Had it been dark, I dare say he would have tried to remedy the mistake by smashing Hareton's skull on the steps. But, we witnessed his salvation, and I was presently below with my precious charge pressed to my heart. Henley descended more leisurely, sobered and abashed. "It is your fault, Ellen," he said. "You should have kept him out of sight. You should have taken him from me." "Is he injured anywhere?" "Injured?" I cried angrily. "If he is not killed, He will be an idiot. Oh? I wonder his mother does not rise from her grave to see how you use him. You're worse than a heathen, treating your own flesh and blood in that manner. He attempted to touch the child, who, on finding himself with me, sobbed off his terror directly. At the first finger his father laid on him, however, he shrieked again louder than before, and struggled as if he would go into convulsions. You shall not meddle with him, I continued. Single quote, she hates you, they all hate you, that's the truth. A happy family you have, and a pretty state you'll come to. I shall come to a prettier, yet, Nelly, laughed the misguided man, recovering his hardness. At present, convey yourself and him away. And hark you, Heathcliff, clear you too quiet from my reach and hearing. I wouldn't murder you tonight, unless, perhaps, I set the house on fire, but that's as my fancy goes. While saying this he took a pint bottle of brandy from the dresser, and poured some into a tumbler. Nay, don't, I entreated. Mr. Hindley, do take warning. Have mercy on this unfortunate boy, if you care nothing for yourself. Anyone will do better for him than I shall, he answered. Have mercy on your own soul, I said, endeavoring to snatch the glass from his hand. Not I. On the contrary, I shall have great pleasure in sending it to perdition to punish its maker, exclaimed the blasphemer. Here's to its hearty damnation. He drank the spirits and impatiently bade us go, terminating his command with a sequel of horrid imprecations too bad to repeat or remember. It's a pity he cannot kill himself with drink, observed Heathcliff, muttering an echo of curses back when the door was shut. He's doing his very utmost, but his constitution defies him. Mr. Kenneth says he would wager his mare that he'll outlive any man on this side Gimmerton, and go to the grave a horror sinner, unless some happy chance out of the common course befall him. I went into the kitchen, and sat down to lull my little lamb to sleep. Heathcliff, as I thought, walked through to the barn. It turned out afterwards that he only got as far as the other side of the settle, when he flung himself on the bench by the wall, removed from the fire, and remained silent. I was rocking Hareton on my knee, and humming a song that began, dash. It was far in the night, and the Baroness Grat, the mither beneath the mules, heard that, when Miss Cathy, who had listened to the hubbub from her room, put her head in, and whispered, dash, are you alone, Nelly? Single quote, yes, miss, I replied. She entered and approached the hearth. I, supposing she was going to say something, looked up. The expression of her face seemed disturbed and anxious. Her lips were half asunder, as if she meant to speak, and she drew a breath, but it escaped in a sigh instead of a sentence. I resumed my song, not having forgotten her recent behavior. Where's Heathcliff? She said, interrupting me. About his work in the stable, was my answer. He did not contradict me. Perhaps he had fallen into a doze. There followed another long pause, during which I perceived a drop or two trickle from Catherine's cheek to the flags. Is she sorry for her shameful conduct? I asked myself. That will be a novelty, but she may come to the point as she will. I shall single quote he help her. No, she felt small trouble regarding any subject, save her own concerns. Oh, dear, she cried at last. I'm very unhappy. A pity, observed I, you were hard to please. So many friends and so few cares, and can't make yourself content. Nellie, will you keep a secret from me? She pursued, kneeling down by me, and lifting her winsome eyes to my face with that sort of look which turns off bad temper, even when one has all the right in the world to indulge it. Is it worth keeping? I inquired, less sulkily. Single quote twice yes, and it worries me, and I must let it out. I want to know what I should do. Today, Edgar Linton has asked me to marry him, and I've given him an answer. Now, before I tell you whether it was a consent or denial, you tell me which it ought to have been. Really, Miss Catherine, how can I know? I replied. To be sure, considering the exhibition you performed in his presence this afternoon, I might say it would be wise to refuse him, since he asked you after that. He must either be hopelessly stupid or a venturesome fool. If you talk so, I won't tell you any more, she returned, peevishly rising to her feet. I accepted him, Nellie. Be quick, and say whether I was wrong. You accepted him. Then what good is it discussing the matter? You have pledged your word, and cannot retract. But say whether I should have done so do. She exclaimed in an irritated tone, chafing her hands together, and frowning. There are many things to be considered before that question can be answered properly, I said, sententiously. First and foremost, do you love Mr. Edgar? Who can help it? Of course I do, she answered. Then I put her through the following catechism. For a girl of 22 it was not injudicious. Do you love him, Miss Cathy? Nonsense, I do that's sufficient. By no means. You must say why. Well, because he is handsome, and pleasant to be with. Bad, was my commentary. And because he is young and cheerful. Bad, still. And because he loves me. Indifferent, coming there. And he will be rich, and I shall like to be the greatest woman in the neighborhood, and I shall be proud of having such a husband. Worst of all. And now, say how you love him. As everybody loves you, silly Nellie. Not that I'll answer. I love the ground under his feet, and the air over his head, and everything he touches, and every word he says. I love all his looks, and all his actions, and him entirely and altogether. There now. And why? Nay, you are making a jest of it. It is exceedingly ill-natured. It's no jest to me, said the young lady, scowling, and turning her face to the fire. I'm very far from jesting, Miss Catherine, I replied. You love Mr. Edgar because he is handsome, and young, and cheerful, and rich, and loves you. The last, however, goes for nothing. You would love him without that, probably, and with it you wouldn't, unless he possessed the four former attractions. No, to be sure not. I should only pity him, hate him, perhaps, if he were ugly, and a clown. But there are several other handsome, rich young men in the world, handsomer, possibly, and richer than he is. What should hinder you from loving them? If there be any, they're out of my way. I've seen none like Edgar. You may see some, and he won't always be handsome, and young, and may not always be rich. Single quotations now, and I have only to do with the present. I wish you would speak rationally. Well, that settles it. If you have only to do with the present, marry Mr. Linton. I don't want your permission for that. I shall marry him, and yet you have not told me whether I am right. Perfectly right. If people be right to marry only for the present. And now, let us hear what you are unhappy about. Your brother will be pleased. The old lady and gentleman will not object, I think. You will escape from a disorderly, comfortless home into a wealthy, respectable one, and you'll love Edgar, and Edgar loves you. All seems smooth and easy. Where is the obstacle? Here. And here, replied Catherine, striking one hand on her forehead, and the other on her breast, in whichever place the soul lies. In my soul and in my heart, I'm convinced I'm wrong. That's very strange. I cannot make it out. It's my secret. But if you will not mock at me, I'll explain it. I can't do it distinctly, but I'll give you a feeling of how I feel. She seated herself by me again, her countenance grew sadder and graver, and her clasped hands trembled. Nellie, do you never dream queer dreams? She said, suddenly, after some minutes' reflection. Single quote twice yes, now and then, I answered. And so do I. I've dreamt in my life dreams that have stayed with me ever after, and changed my ideas. They've gone through and through me, like wine through water, and altered the color of my mind. And this is one, I'm going to tell it, but take care not to smile at any part of it. Oh? Don't, Miss Catherine, I cried. We were dismal enough without conjuring up ghosts and visions to perplex us. Come, be a merry like yourself. Look at little Hareton. He's dreaming nothing dreary. How sweetly he smiles in his sleep. Single quote twice yes. And how sweetly his father curses in his solitude. You remember him, I dare say, when he was just such another as that chubby thing, nearly as young and innocent. However, Nellie, I shall oblige you to listen, it's not long, and I've no power to be merry tonight. I won't hear it, I won't hear it, I repeated, hastily. I was superstitious about dreams then, and I am still, and Catherine had an unusual gloom in her aspect, that made me dread something from which I might shape a prophecy, and foresee a fearful catastrophe. She was vexed, but she did not proceed. Apparently taking up another subject, she recommenced in a short time. If I were in heaven, Nellie, I should be extremely miserable. Because you were not fit to go there, I answered. All sinners would be miserable in heaven. But it is not for that. I dreamt once that I was there. I tell you I won't hearken to your dreams, Miss Catherine. I'll go to bed, I interrupted again. She laughed, and held me down, for I made a motion to leave my chair. This is nothing, cried she, I was only going to say that heaven did not seem to be my home, and I broke my heart with weeping to come back to earth. And the angels were so angry that they flung me out into the middle of the heath on the top of Wuthering Heights, where I woke sobbing for joy. That will do to explain my secret, as well as the other. I've no more business to marry Edgar Linton than I have to be in heaven. And if the wicked man in there had not brought Heathcliff so low, I shouldn't have thought of it. It would degrade me to marry Heathcliff now, so he shall never know how I love him, and that, not because he's handsome, Nellie, but because he's more myself than I am. Whatever our souls are made of, his and mine are the same, and Linton's is as different as a moonbeam from lightning, or frost from fire. The speech ended, I became sensible of Heathcliff's presence. Having noticed a slight movement, I turned my head, and saw him rise from the bench, and steal out noiselessly. He had listened till he heard Catherine say it would degrade her to marry him, and then he stayed to hear no further. My companion, sitting on the ground, was prevented by the back of the settle from remarking his presence or departure. But I started, and bade her hush. "We?" she asked, gazing nervously around. "Joseph is here," I answered, catching opportunely the roll of his cart wheels up the road. "And Heathcliff will come in with him. I'm not sure whether he were not at the door this moment." "Oh, he couldn't overhear me at the door," said she. "Give me hair on, while you get the supper, and when it is ready ask me to sup with you. I want to cheat my uncomfortable conscience, and be convinced that Heathcliff has no notion of these things." "He has not, has he? He does not know what being in love is." "I see no reason that he should not know, as well as you," I returned. "And if you are his choice, he will be the most unfortunate creature that ever was born. As soon as you become Mrs. Linton, he loses friend, and love, and all. Have you considered how you'll bear the separation, and how he'll bear to be quite deserted in the world? Because, Miss Catherine, single quotation, quite deserted. We separated," she exclaimed, with an accent of indignation. "Who is to separate us, pray? They'll meet the fate of Milo." "Not as long as I live, Ellen, for an immortal creature. Every Linton on the face of the earth might melt into nothing before I could consent to forsake Heathcliff." "Oh, that's not what I intend, that's not what I mean. I shouldn't be a Mrs. Linton were such a price demanded. He'll be as much to me as he has been all his lifetime. Edgar must shake off his antipathy, and tolerate him, at least. He will, when he learns my true feelings towards him. Nellie, I see now you think me a selfish wretch. But did it never strike you that if Heathcliff and I married, we should be beggars? Whereas, if I marry Linton, I can aid Heathcliff to rise, and place him out of my brother's power." "With your husband's money, Miss Catherine?" I asked. "You'll find him not so pliable as you calculate upon, and, though I am hardly a judge, I think that's the worst motive you've given yet for being the wife of young Linton." "It is not," retorted she. "It is the best. The others were the satisfaction of my whims, and for Edgar's sake, too, to satisfy him. This is for the sake of one who comprehends in his person my feelings to Edgar and myself. I cannot express it. But surely you and everybody have a notion that there is or should be an existence of yours beyond you. What were the use of my creation, if I were entirely contained here? My great miseries in this world have been Heathcliff's miseries, and I watched and felt each from the beginning. My great thought in living is himself. If all else perished, and he remained, I should still continue to be. And if all else remained, and he were annihilated, the universe would turn to a mighty stranger. I should not seem a part of it. My love for Linton is like the foliage in the woods. Time will change it, I am well aware, as winter changes the trees. My love for Heathcliff resembles the eternal rocks beneath, a source of little visible delight, but necessary. Nellie, I am Heathcliff. He's always, always in my mind, not as a pleasure, any more than I am always a pleasure to myself, but as my own being. So don't talk of our separation again, it is impracticable." And she paused, and hid her face in the folds of my gown. but I jerked it forcibly away. I was out of patience with her folly. "If I can make any sense of your nonsense, miss," I said, "it only goes to convince me that you are ignorant of the duties you undertake on marrying, or else that you are a wicked, unprincipled girl. But trouble me with no more secrets. I'll not promise to keep them." "You'll keep that?" she asked, eagerly. "No, I'll not promise," I repeated. She was about to insist, when the entrance of Joseph finished our conversation, and Catherine removed her seat to corner, and nursed Hareton, while I made the supper. After it was cooked, my fellow servant and I began to quarrel who should carry some to Mr. Hindley, and we didn't settle it till all was nearly cold. Then we came to the agreement that we would let him ask, if he wanted any, for we failed particularly to go into his presence when he had been some time alone. "And how isn't that not comes and fro this field, be this time? What is he about?" "Gert idle demanded the old man, looking around for Heathcliff. "I'll call him," I replied. "He's in the barn, I've no doubt." I went and called, but got no answer. On returning, I whispered to Catherine that he had heard a good part of what she said, I was sure, and told how I saw him quit the kitchen just as she complained of her brother's conduct regarding him. She jumped up in a fine fright, flung Hareton onto the settle, and ran to seek for her friend herself, not taking leisure to consider why she was so flurried, or how her talk would have affected him. She was absent such a while that Joseph proposed we should wait no longer. He cunningly conjectured they were staying away in order to avoid hearing his protracted blessing. They were ill enough for all manners, he affirmed, and on their behalf he added that night a special prayer to the usual quarter of an hour's supplication before meat, and would have tacked another to the end of the grace, had not his young mistress broken in upon him with the hurried command that he must run down the road, and, wherever Heathcliff had rambled, find and make him re-enter directly. "I want to speak to him, and I must, before I go upstairs," she said. "And the gate is open, he is somewhere out of hearing?" For he would not reply, though I shouted at the top of the fold as loud as I could. Joseph objected at first. She was too much in earnest, however, to suffer contradiction, and at last he placed his hat on his head, and walked grumbling forth. Meantime, Catherine paced up and down the floor, exclaiming, "I wonder where he is, I wonder where he can be." "What did I say, Nellie? I've forgotten. Was he vexed at my bad humor this afternoon?" "Dear, tell me what I've said to grieve him." "I do wish he'd come. I do wish he would. What a noise for nothing," I cried, though rather uneasy myself. "What a trifle scares you. It's surely no great cause of alarm that Heathcliff should take a moonlight saunter on the moors, or even lie too sulky to speak to us in the hayloft. I'll engage he's lurking there. See if I don't ferret him out." I departed to renew my search. Its result was disappointment, and Joseph's quest ended in the same. "The lad gets more unwary," observed he on re-entering. "He's left this gate at the full swing, and Mrs. Pony has trodden down 2 rigs o' corn, and plodded through, right over into the meadow. Howsomedever, my stray will play the devil tomorrow, and he'll do well. He's patience its own we sick careless, awful craters patience its own his. but he'll not be so LCOC, all on you. Yaman and single quote he drive him out of his head for note. Have you found Heathcliff? Yes, interrupted Catherine. Have you been looking for him, as I ordered? I said more liquor look for this horse, he replied. It 'ud be to more sense. But I can look for no other horse ne'er man of an egg like this as black as the chimbley. And Heathcliff's knowing to chap the coon with my whistle happen he'll be less hard o' hearing we. It was a very dark evening for summer, the clouds appeared inclined to thunder, and I said we had better all sit down. The approaching rain would be certain to bring him home without further trouble. However, Catherine would not be persuaded into tranquility. She kept wandering to and fro, from the gate to the door, in a state of agitation which permitted no repose, and at length took up a permanent situation on one side of the wall, near the road, where, heedless of my expostulations and the growling thunder, and the great drops that began to plash around her, she remained, calling at intervals, and then listening, and then crying outright. She beat Hareton, or any child, had a good passionate fit of crying. About midnight, while we still sat up, the storm came rattling over the heights in full fury. There was a violent wind, as well as thunder, and either one or the other split the tree off at the corner of the building. A huge bough fell across the roof, and knocked down a portion of the east chimney stack, sending a clatter of stones and soot into the kitchen fire. We thought a bolt had fallen in the middle of us, and Joseph swung on to his knees, beseeching the Lord to remember the patriarchs Noah and Lot, and, as in former times, spare the righteous, though he smote the ungodly. I felt some sentiment that it must be a judgment on us also. The Jonah, in my mind, was Mr. Earnshaw, and I shook the handle of his den that I might ascertain if he were yet living. He replied audibly enough, in a fashion which made my companion vociferate, more clamorously than before, that a wide distinction might be drawn between saints like himself and sinners like his master. But the uproar passed away in 20 minutes, leaving us all unharmed, excepting Cathy, who got thoroughly drenched for her obstinacy in refusing to take shelter, and standing benetless and shawless to catch as much water as she could with her hair and clothes. She came in and lay down the settle, all soaked as she was, turning her face to the back, and putting her hands before it. "Well, miss," I exclaimed, touching her shoulder, "you are not bent on getting your death, are ye? Do you know what o'clock it is?" "12:30. Come to bed. There's no use waiting any longer on that foolish boy. He'll be gone to Merton, and he'll stay there now. He guesses we shouldn't wait for him till this late hour, at least. He guesses that only Mr. Hindley would be up, and he'd rather avoid having the door opened by the master." Nay, he's knowing at Merton," said Joseph. "I's never wonder but he's at to both 'em of a bog hole." This visitation warned single quote T for note, and I would have you to look out, Miss Yamu be do next. Thank Heaven for all works together for good to them as is chosen, and piked out fro this rubbish. Yan all wet the scriptures. And he began quoting several texts, referring us to chapters and verses where we might find them. I, having vainly begged the wilful girl to rise and remove her wet things, left him preaching and her shivering, and bedded myself to bed with little Hareton, who slept as fast as if everyone had been sleeping around him. I heard Joseph read on a while afterwards. Then I distinguished his slow step on the ladder, and then I dropped asleep. Coming down somewhat later than usual, I saw, by the sunbeams piercing the chinks of the shutters, Miss Catherine still seated near the fireplace. The house door was ajar, too. Light entered from its unclosed windows. Henley had come out, and stood on the kitchen hearth, haggard and drowsy. "What ails you, Kathy?" he was saying when I entered. "You look as dismal as a drowned whelp. Why are you so damp and pale, child?" "I've been wet," she answered reluctantly, "and I'm cold, that's all." "Oh, she is naughty," I cried, perceiving the master to be tolerably sober. "She got steeped in the shower of yesterday evening, and there she has sat the night through, and I couldn't prevail on her to stir." Mr. Earnshaw stared at us in surprise. "The night through," he repeated. "What kept her up?" "Not fear of the thunder, surely." That was over hours since. Neither of us wished to mention Heathcliff's absence, as long as we could conceal it. So I replied, I didn't know how she took it into her head to sit up, and she said nothing. The morning was fresh and cool. I threw back the lattice, and presently the room filled with sweet scents from the garden. But Catherine called peevishly to me, "Ellen, shut the window. I'm starving." And her teeth chattered as she shrank closer to the almost extinguished embers. "She's ill," said Henley, taking her wrist. "I suppose that's the reason she would not go to bed." "Damn it, I don't want to be troubled with more sickness here." "What took you into the rain?" "Running after two lads, as usual," croaked Joseph, catching an opportunity from our hesitation to thrust in his evil tongue. "If I were ya, master, I'd just slam the boards either faces all on 'em, gentle and simple. Never a day ye are off, but yon cat Olin comes sneaking hither. And Miss Nelly, she's a fine lass. She sits watching for ye to eat in the kitchen, and as you're in at one door, he's out at t'other. And then, where grand lady goes a-courting of her side. It's bonny behaviour, lurking on Wallington fields, after 12 o' the night, we that fall, fleecing the veil of a gipsy, Heathcliff. They think I'm blind, but I'm not at the sort. I see the young Linton both coming and going, and I seed y'all directing his discourse to me, ye gawd for a note, slatternly wench. Nip up and bolt into this house, to minute y'all heard the maester's horse-fit clatter up the road." "Silence, eavesdropper!" cried Catherine. "No need of your insolence before me. Edgar Linton came yesterday by chance, Henley, and it was I who told him to be off, because I knew you would not like to have met him as you were." "You lie, Cathy, no doubt," answered her brother, "and you are a confounded simpleton. But never mind Linton at present. Tell me, were you not with Heathcliff last night? Speak the truth, now. You need not be afraid of harming him, though I hate him as much as ever. He did me a good turn a short time since that will make my conscience tender of breaking his neck. To prevent it, I shall send him about his business this very morning, and after he's gone, I'd advise you all to look sharp. I shall only have the more humour for ye." "I never saw Heathcliff last night," answered Catherine, beginning to sob bitterly, "and if you do turn him out at doors, I'll go with him. But, perhaps, you'll never have an opportunity. Perhaps, he's gone." Here she burst into uncontrollable grief, and the remainder of her words were inarticulate. Hindley lavished on her a torrent of scornful abuse, and bade her get to her room immediately, or she shouldn't cry for nothing. I obliged her to obey, and I shall never forget what a scene she acted when we reached her chamber. It terrified me. I thought she was going mad, and I begged Joseph to run for the doctor. It proved the commencement of delirium, and Mr. Kenneth, as soon as he saw her, pronounced her dangerously ill. She had a fever. He bled her, and he told me to let her live on away in water gruel, and take care she did not throw herself downstairs or out of the window. And then he left, for he had enough to do in the parish, where 2 or 3 miles was the ordinary distance between cottage and cottage.